So we had your first clue, which is this one right here, and this is going to be your third clue. It's going to require 2 keys. So this is going to be the second part to the Muse Has Spoken. And to start things off, we're just going to go ahead and try to color match the previous page. So we're not going to be adding too much weathering just yet. We're going to keep it fairly light because we are going to want to match that previous page. I don't necessarily want it to have a haze like the page next to it, but for those white symbols to match, I am going to have to add them before finishing all the weathering. So before we go on and add any of those symbols, I'm going to go ahead and take advantage and darken the background to this image beforehand. That'll give it some time to dry while I add in those white symbols. And because we do need the two to match, I'm going to go ahead and mix a similar color palette that I did last time. For this, I'm just going to be adding a little bit of yellow, and I'm just going to be mixing that with a titanium white. This will just kind of add a little bit of color to that white, just so that it's not so glaring to look at. I'm not entirely sure what these symbols are down here. It almost looks a little cursive-y, but because the white isn't so fluid, it was a little bit difficult to get in there. And now that we have all our symbols in there, we can go ahead and start weathering the page. This will do 2 things. 1, the obvious, it's going to make the page look a lot older. 2, those white symbols are going to get knocked back a little bit and not be so prominent. So here, we're just going to continue to further darken this background. But I do need to keep in mind that that bottom half of the image is going to be almost like a solid black. So I can't have the 2 colors competing against one another. So whatever color this background ends up being, it has to be slightly lighter than that bottom half of that image. I do personally like to add a little bit of shading before doing any of my line work. It acts almost like a guide for myself because I do sometimes get lost as to where I'm at, and having some parts of the area darkened up does just keep me on track. Here we're just going to be adding the pre-highlights. I do sometimes lose a little bit of my line work here, but this is necessary to do beforehand because if you do this afterwards, you might accidentally lighten up parts of the inked line work that you made that you don't necessarily want lightened up. And then here's going to be the tricky part. It's difficult to get color shades with black, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding a little bit of purple to this. That'll just help give it some color variation. It won't be extremely prominent, but it is going to be subtly there. And let's not forget to add highlights to the gnomes. They're pretty small on this page, so they're not going to need too much, but even adding just a subtle amount of white to them will help them pop from the page. And although the previous page I did not smear the red, that smudging red is something I did on previous pages, and I want that pattern to continue throughout the book. And now that the black is dried fully, we can go ahead and add a little bit of more white highlights to this. What this will do is now that there's a black and a purple background, it's going to be catching those colors and making them a little bit more prominent. And now that I have the black as a reference, I can go ahead and start darkening the background just a little bit more. But to reiterate, I do need to keep in mind that this color cannot overshadow the darker color underneath. And now that I have a good base of colors, I'm going to go ahead and start using my 08 pen, and I'm going to be adding in all the line work to this. So one thing I want to keep in mind is based on my reference image, it looks like all my outside line work is going to be a little bit thicker than all the inside work. So when I get to the inside part, I'm going to go ahead and switch down to a 0.5 pen. Background is starting to get a little too dark, so I might have to come back around with some white for that black part. My guidelines were starting to get a little bit lost, so I accidentally drew the gnome slightly weird here, but I think it looks alright. And then for the red, let's go ahead and grab our Sharpie. And let's go ahead and start writing out our notes. Now the weathering process has completely ruined my guidelines here, so I'm just going to try to draw them in roughly where I thought they were. And let's not forget the symbol on top of the page. And before I move on to the writing part, I'm just going to weather the corners just a little bit more. I feel like the outside of this page doesn't quite match, so I just want to touch it up just a little bit. The message written here is a little sad, honestly, because it sounds like Ford is extremely excited that he got to meet his muse, and that this is going to be it, his grand unified theory of weirdness, which we all know now that Bill wasn't really helping him out, so much more helping himself out. So I'm really curious how this is going to play out later down in the journal. And then before we call this page done, I'm going to add a few more highlights to a few areas that I feel like are missing. And that is another page done.